Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Law, and I am the organizer of the Digital Accessibility Legal Summit. And we have with us here today Jack McElhaney from MicroAssist. And Jack is going to provide us with an update on lawsuits by the numbers. Jack.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for tuning in to the 2022 Digital Accessibility Legal Summit. As Chris mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at MicroAssist. We're a accessibility consulting firm located in Austin, Texas. And for the past 6.5 years, I've been curating and publishing a free weekly newsletter called Accessibility in the News, where I track a large variety of accessibility news and topics from around the world. And as Chris knows, the first legal summit in 2019, I spoke about resources and resourcefulness, which was all about the publications people could tune into to do some research. And then at the 2020 Legal Summit, I spoke about legal and accessibility impacts of COVID-19. And then last year, I covered the impact of COVID-19 on accessibility in the legal landscape. And behind me, you can see different publications that Chris has published from those different summits, and you can get those at Fastcase. My topic this year is related to lawsuits by the numbers. And lawsuits by the numbers continue. Last year, the final numbers were 2,895 website accessibility lawsuits filed in the federal court. And that did not include state court filings. And that represented approximately a 350% increase for case filing rates from 5 years ago. So as you can see, that number continued right up until last year. I mentioned to Chris right before we started the marquee names that continue to flow through related to lawsuits. Just in the last week, Harvard University, Brown University, they got lawsuits, Colgate University, and then throughout the last 6 months, Whole Foods, Procter & Gamble, Brookstones, Benihana, Morgan Stanley, REI, and the list continues to go on. And it's always these big name companies. The plaintiffs like to go after the companies that have a splash in the news, and that in 2022 has continued, and we don't see any slowdown there. As far as the legal activity this year, from January to June, there was approximately 4,914 filings as of June 2022, and that's a 22% decrease over 2021. So we've actually seen a decline. I think that's related to COVID-19 was pushing a lot of lawsuits in 2021, and we've seen a drop this year. But we still have seen a large increase over other years. And when you look at 2022 versus 2021, you might say, okay, that's a massive drop. But when you look at 2020, it's more than in 2020 at the same time of year. So we are at a significant pace still with all these filings. And then as far as specifics, in July and August, a federal judge in California in July sided with Uber over claims that the ride-hailing company should be required to provide its riders in New Orleans and Jackson, Mississippi with vehicles that are wheelchair accessible. The judge ruled Uber was not obligated to supply wheelchair accessible vehicles in the trio of riders behind the two class action lawsuits filed against the company because they had not established it would be a reasonable request to make. That's not related to websites, but you can see that there's a significant amount of activity related to just disability rights in general. And then specifically to websites in August, California Court of Appeals agreed with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit that websites are not public accommodations covered by Title III of the ADA. The court also held that creating and maintaining an inaccessible website cannot constitute intentional discrimination under the UNRRA Act. And I know for sure that this is going to be covered in greater detail in this conference from various attorneys. September, from a a legal activity standpoint, September was the slowest month for web accessibility legal opinions for over a year, and there were 319 ADA accessibility lawsuits. So again, there is a trend of a slight decline. We'll see what the last quarter of the year does for us. Last quarter for previous years has had significant number of lawsuits. Now, the big thing that happened in September is Senators Duckworth and Sarbanes introduced the Websites and Software Applications Accessibility Act, which is the Senate 4998 and the House 9021. And they submitted that to the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the bill would be required that the DOJ and EEOC to develop and enforce accessibility standards covering websites and digital technology used by employers, places of public accommodation, state and local governments, and testing entities. That's the thing that's getting a lot of attention, lots of focus, and I know for sure that the other speakers are going to cover this next week. The other big lawsuit related to disabilities, not necessarily websites, is the Chicago Cubs lawsuit alleges Wrigley Field does not have enough wheelchair accessible seats. And so again, another big name, marquee names always get the attention of people in the public. And then accessibility and laws more as far as bills, October 2020. And on October 8th, the U.S. Senate Aging Committee, chaired by Bob Casey, in the House of Veterans Affairs Committee Chairman Mike Tucano, sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs urging the VA to do more to make the agency's websites and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. Similar to the Duckworth bill, this is specifically related to the VA. Lots of attention being paid to that, lots of things being written about specifically to that. Again, we're seeing more focus and more attention to this at a very national level. And that's exactly what Chris and I've talked about this ad nauseum. That's what we need from a U.S. standpoint, is getting it at the federal level, similar to the ADA that was passed in 1990. Another one, which was related to the FDA, and this took place in August, but then it went into effect last week, which was related to hearing aids. Hearing aids for mild to moderate impairment without requirements for exams and prescriptions or audiologist fittings are now available at drugstores. And that's a huge, huge change for people across the United States. And there's a lot of people who have hearing impairment and deafness that could not afford any of these type of hearing aids that you had to go to a doctor to an audiologist for. So the Biden administration, the FDA, pushed this through, and it's all available now to people in the public, which is great. And then up in Maine, there was the Lawford Atchison Hotel case where the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit reversed the lower court's dismissal of a suit against Atchison Hotels, which operates in southern coast of Maine. The First Circuit revived Loeffler's suit because there was still plausible claims based on the third-party booking websites that may not have been updated. So hotels continue to get hit. That's an area of focus across the country, and specifically in this chain up in Maine. And then other technology trends and accessibility trends that have continued this year that I saw started when COVID started back in 2020. Voluntary product accessibility templates is an area that impacts a lot of companies, and government agencies, colleges, universities have been enforcing the requirement under Section 508 that vendors who sell into those entities submit a VPAT on their products to attest to the level of accessibility for their products. And there's been a tremendous amount of pressure over the last 2 years, 2.5 years now, on companies that have products to submit current VPATs and accurate VPATs as to what level of accessibility they have. And so that is a trend that has continued through COVID. it is something that they should have been doing before COVID, but once everything went online, a new spotlight was on the accessibility of products that different organizations were buying, specifically at colleges, universities, and federal and state agencies. And then voting, we are now into the voting season. And so voting is from a news coverage standpoint, is getting a tremendous amount of coverage over the last, I'd say, 6 months. And then back in February, the Justice Department issued a guidance under the ADA on how to ensure that ballot drop boxes are accessible to voters with disabilities. And that continues state by state as being a big area of focus. There's been a lot of lawsuits on it. Some of them have been settled state by state. But now that we are deeply into the midterm elections, there's been a tremendous amount being written about that on a weekly basis. And I see that continuing all the way through to the November elections. And so in conclusion, the last 9 months behind us, 2022 has already been filled with many lawsuits. As I mentioned, some of the marquee names. I see that continuing this year, next year, and coming years. And these different bills that have been introduced, my prediction on those are, if those don't get passed in the House and the Senate, and then ultimately signed by the president, we will continue to see this kind of wild west of lawsuits across the country. And I don't predict that these bills won't or will get passed. I'd love to see them get passed, because I think that's what this summit is all about, is what are the rights of people? What should companies be paying attention to? And so we'll wait and see what 2023 brings us related to those bills that have been submitted. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great summit. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you very much, Jack. That was a terrific summary. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks for mentioning the book too. There is a 50% discount from the book from Fastcase with information on that on our website. And yeah, thanks for covering the numbers. And yeah, next week in the conference we'll look at the whys. Why does this all still keep going on, and what can we all really do about it? That's really what the conference is all about.
Yeah, so I'm excited. You've got a great lineup of speakers, so I'm very excited to hear what they have to say about all of these items.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank Jack. Bye-bye.
Thank you.